Welcome back to the Perspicacious Perspective. I've decided to make this episode about North Korea, as most of us know at least that North Korea is the most oppressive country in the world, yet we're naturally ignorant about what goes on there. North Korea is notorious for its authoritarian regime, where political dissidents are often imprisoned in labour camps or subjected to execution. Freedom of expression is highly restricted, and the surveillance of citizens is completely pervasive. This episode will tell you everything the West knows about North Korea and how bad it actually is over there. So what is a Kwan-li-so? Kwan-li-so are massive, high-security camps for political prisoners. These are not standard criminal detention centres. People end up here for political reasons such as speaking ill of the Kim regime, practicing religion, especially Christianity, attempting to defect or having family members who did, or listening to foreign broadcasts like South Korean radio or Western music. Often entire families, including children and the elderly, are imprisoned due to North Korea's policy of guilt by association. If your grandfather was suspected of opposing the regime, you could be born and die in a prison camp without ever being charged or tried. Prisoners mine coal, farm, cut timber, or work in dangerous factories, often 12 to 16 hours a day. Many survive on cornmeal mixed with grass or tree bark. Malnutrition is rampant. There's no medical care, illness and injury go untreated. Guards use beatings, isolation, and psychological torture. Executions, public or otherwise, are routine for disobedience or escape attempts. Women are often raped by guards. Those who become pregnant may be forced to abort or have their babies killed after birth. Examples include Camp 14, no one ever apparently leaves this camp. Camp 15 is a mix of political prisoners and criminal offenders, known for having a rare few survivors who later defected. A few high-profile defectors have escaped and told their stories. Shin Dong-hyuk, perhaps the most well-known North Korean defector, was born inside Camp 14, one of the country's most secretive and brutal political prison camps. He grew up knowing nothing of the outside world, not even the concept of freedom or love. Indoctrinated to inform on others, he once reported his own mother and brother for planning to escape. They were later executed before his eyes. After enduring brutal torture that included being burned and suspended by hooks, he encountered an older prisoner who described life beyond the camp walls. Desperate for food and hope, Shin and the man attempted to flee. The older man was electrocuted trying to cross the camp's electric fence. Shin used his body as insulation to climb over and escape. After a harrowing journey through China, he made it to South Korea, where he later authored the memoir Escape from Camp 14. Although some parts of his story were later revised for accuracy, the essential truth of his suffering remains well documented by human rights investigators. Another powerful story is that of Ji Song-ho, who lost a leg and a hand after collapsing on train tracks while trying to steal coal to exchange for food during the 1990s famine. Despite being gravely injured, he managed to escape North Korea using homemade wooden crutches and eventually resettled in South Korea. His story gained international attention when he raised his crutches during President Donald Trump's 2018 State of the Union address, a symbol of perseverance and the will to survive. Then there's Kang Chol-hwan, who was sent to Camp 15 as a child because of his grandfather's alleged disloyalty to the regime. He spent 10 years enduring starvation, forced labour, and psychological trauma before being released. Kang later escaped North Korea and wrote The Aquariums of Pyongyang, one of the earliest and most detailed first-hand accounts of life inside a prison camp. These testimonies were critical, but the international community needed more than stories to confront North Korea's denials, and that's where satellite imagery came in. Despite the regime's claims that no such camps exist, high-resolution satellite photos told a different story. Analysts and organisations such as Amnesty International and the Committee for Human Rights in North Korea began using commercial satellite technology to track the location, size, and growth of prison camps. The imagery revealed sprawling compounds surrounded by barbed wire and guard towers, with clearly defined areas for labour, housing, and execution. Analysts compared historical images over time, identifying not only expansion but also signs of forced deforestation and even mass graves. These visuals were paired with defectors' testimonies to map out key areas within the camps, such as where prisoners worked, lived, and were punished. This combination of digital surveillance and eyewitness accounts became essential evidence for the United Nations Commission of Inquiry, which in 2014 concluded that North Korea's systematic, widespread, and gross human rights violations likely amounted to crimes against humanity. Despite these findings and overwhelming documentation, the regime continues to deny the camps exist while they remain visible from space. What do we know about North Korea's arbitrary arrest and torture system? North Korea's system of arbitrary arrest and torture is a core mechanism of control in the regime's authoritarian grip on its people. It's not just about punishing criminal behavior, it's about crushing any hint of disloyalty, suppressing independent thought, and maintaining a climate of fear. Here's what we know based on defector testimonies, UN reports, and investigations by human rights organizations. Arrests in North Korea are often completely disconnected from any legal process. People can be detained for things that wouldn't be considered crimes elsewhere, such as watching a South Korean drama, speaking critically of the regime, or possessing a Bible. They can be detained without any formal charge or warrant. Most arrests are carried out by state security department agents, often in the middle of the night. People can be detained simply because of family ties. If someone defects or commits a political crime, their relatives, even if innocent, can be arrested under guilt by association. Detention doesn't guarantee a trial. In fact, most political prisoners are never tried in a court, and for those who are, the trials are usually brief, secretive, and entirely controlled by the state. Once arrested, detainees are taken to pre-trial detention centres where the real nightmare begins. Torture here is routine and systematic, designed to extract confessions or simply punish perceived disloyalty. Reported methods include beating with sticks, rods, and rubber clubs, often while bound in stress positions, forced kneeling or sitting in excruciating poses for hours or even days, pigeon torture, which is where the prisoner's hands are bound behind their back and they're suspended in the air, causing shoulder dislocation and long-term damage, water torture, where prisoners are made to ingest large amounts of water before being stomped on to induce vomiting, and sleep deprivation, starvation, and isolation in pitch-dark cells for extended periods. Many victims report being interrogated daily for weeks or months, while repeated beatings to break their will. Some do not survive. Those who do are often left with permanent physical and psychological damage. The types of detention centres include pre-trial interrogation centres. This is where the worst torture happens. Short-term detention centres for misdemeanours or minor infractions. Mobile labour brigades, which are essentially forced labour camps for non-political offenders, and re-education camps where there's harsh labour camps where prisoners are often worked to death. And as I mentioned earlier, total control zones such as Kwan-li-so, which are political prison camps for lifetime imprisonment with no release. Arrest often leads to cycle of abuse as prisoners are moved from one type of facility to another, enduring forced labour, indoctrination, and continued mistreatment. North Koreans have no right to legal representation or appeal. The judiciary is an extension of the ruling Workers' Party. Judges, prosecutors, and investigators are all loyal to the regime, not the law. Even foreigners, including Christian missionaries and aid workers, have been subjected to arbitrary detention and coerced confessions. The regime often uses them for propaganda or bargaining leverage. The goal of arbitrary arrest and torture isn't just punishment, it's control. The system sends a clear message: obedience is survival, and even suspicion is enough to destroy your life. As a result, fear and silence dominate every level of society. People self-censor, mistrust neighbours, and remain completely vulnerable to the whims of the state. What do we know about North Korea's public executions? Public executions in North Korea are one of the regime's most brutal tools of fear and control. They aren't just about punishment, they're deliberate, spectacle-based terror tactics used to keep the population obedient and fearful. Here's what we know from defector testimonies, satellite evidence, and international human rights reports. Public executions are used to instill fear in the population, serve as warning to deter dissent, disobedience, or defection, and enforce ideological loyalty and control over behaviour, even in private. People are often forced to attend, sometimes entire villages, students, or even children, creating a collective trauma that reinforces regime power through terror. Executions are typically staged in open fields, schoolyards, factory yards, or riverbanks near towns or labour camps. Designated execution sites have been identified by satellite images and confirmed through survivor accounts. In some cases, trucks equipped with loudspeakers announce the event ahead of time, commanding citizens to assemble and watch. The threshold for being publicly executed in North Korea is shockingly low. Crimes that have led to public executions include watching or distributing South Korean or Western media, practicing Christianity or owning a Bible, attempting to defect or helping others escape, theft of food, particularly from state-owned sources, anti-state activities, which could be as minor as criticizing the leadership or tearing a photo of Kim Jong-un, or possessing or spreading reactionary ideology, which is a broad term that covers foreign news, books, or any media not state-approved. The most common method is firing squad, often with automatic rifles fired at close range. In some rare and more extreme cases, especially inside prison camps, people have reportedly been executed by hanging, burning, or even explosive devices used symbolically to demonstrate total obliteration. Some testimonies describe bodies being left on display afterward to further intimidate the public. Children, teenagers, co-workers, and neighbours are often compelled to watch. Defectors have described being made to stand in formation during executions, sometimes with guards walking through the crowd to ensure everyone paid attention. Those who cry or show sympathy may be detained or punished themselves. Some documented examples of public executions in North Korea include a woman being executed for distributing South Korean DVDs to neighbours, farm workers being shot for stealing corn during the 1990s famine, and a group of Christians being executed after being caught worshipping in a private home. In 2007, North Korean authorities executed several high school students publicly for watching and sharing South Korean dramas. This was reported by defectors and supported by non-governmental organizations like the Database Center for North Korean Human Rights. Although North Korea doesn't permit international observers, multiple sources have confirmed these executions. Defector testimonies consistently describe similar scenes. Satellite imagery has identified known execution sites, and human rights groups like Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, and the UN Commission of Inquiry have documented dozens of cases in detail. The public execution system creates a society where no one feels safe, and where even private thoughts and behaviours are policed by fear. It's not just punishment, it's mental conditioning. Children grow up traumatised, adults live with chronic paranoia, and neighbours often report each other to avoid suspicion themselves. What do we know about North Korea's forced labour and slavery? North Korea's system of forced labour and modern slavery is one of the most widespread and entrenched in the world. It touches nearly every layer of society, from prison camps to school children, from factory workers to overseas labourers. It's not just labour under duress, it's a state-organised system of exploitation that fuels the regime's economy, maintains control over its people, and generates hard currency for the elite. Inside North Korea's vast prison system, especially in the Kwan-li-so political prison camps and the re-education camps known in Korea as Kyo-hwa-so, forced labour is standard and brutal. Prisoners are made to work in coal mines, factories, farms, or logging sites under extreme conditions. Workdays often last 12 to 18 hours with no rest, regardless of weather or health. Those who fall behind or resist are beaten, tortured, or even executed. Food rations are deliberately minimal, creating a starvation environment where prisoners literally work to survive. Children born into camps are forced to labour from a young age, and many die from exhaustion or accidents. Labour isn't considered punishment in North Korea. It's just considered as part of the sentence. There's no pay, no choice, and no escape. Even outside the camps, forced labour is a daily reality for average North Koreans, particularly for students and teenagers who are routinely pulled from school to do farming, construction, or military-related work, factory workers who are assigned to jobs by the state and must meet impossible quotas, and women who are often forced into labour brigades or unpaid community work. The regime organises labour under battalions, such as stormtroops, who are used for large construction projects like new cities or monuments, and youth brigades, which are groups of teens sent to work in remote areas under harsh conditions. People are not allowed to refuse this labour. Doing so is considered disloyal and can lead to punishment, detention, or worse. North Korea has also been caught sending tens of thousands of workers abroad, primarily to Russia, China, the Middle East, Southeast Asia, and previously parts of Eastern Europe and Africa. These workers are highly controlled. They live in guarded dormitories, often with confiscated passports. 90% or more of their wages are taken by the regime and funneled back to the state, and they're not allowed contact with locals. must follow strict surveillance, and are punished if they don't comply. These workers build buildings, labour in factories, or work on ships, sometimes in unsafe or near-slavery conditions. The UN and the US State Department have officially classified this as state-sponsored forced labour and a form of modern slavery. It's also believed to be a major source of foreign currency for Kim Jong-un's regime, used to fund nuclear weapons, luxury goods, and elite programs. The regime disguises forced labour under ideological slogans like self-reliance or great socialist construction and devotion to the dear leader. Labour is framed as a moral duty and an expression of loyalty. Propaganda glorifies tireless work as heroic, and those who resist are labelled traitors. It's estimated that over 100,000 prisoners are enslaved in political prison camps. Over 1 million North Koreans are believed to be subject to some form of forced or unpaid labour inside the country. Around 50,000 to 100,000 North Korean workers have been sent abroad for forced labour, generating hundreds of millions of dollars for the regime each year. In 2018, the Global Slavery Index ranked North Korea as the worst country in the world for the prevalence of modern slavery. Forced labour reinforces social hierarchy, breaks individual will, and ensures total control over people's lives. It has devastating effects on families, education, mental health, and physical well-being. Many North Koreans spend decades in forced labour with no hope of release or advancement. What do we know about North Korea's totalitarian surveillance and control? North Korea's totalitarian surveillance and control system is one of the most comprehensive and intrusive in the world. The regime's power rests not just on military force or censorship, but on a deep web of surveillance, propaganda, and collective responsibility that infiltrates nearly every aspect of daily life. Surveillance in North Korea is pervasive and institutionalized. The state monitors conversations at home, even among family members, daily routines including attendance at political meetings and workplace activities, religious practices, private gatherings and personal relationships, and travel and movement, which is heavily restricted and must be pre-approved. People are constantly watching each other, not just out of loyalty, but out of fear. One of the most effective tools of surveillance is the Inmin ban system. Every citizen is assigned to a neighbourhood unit, usually made up of 20 to 30 households. Each unit has a leader who reports to local government authorities. Members are responsible for monitoring their neighbours and reporting suspicious behaviour, and weekly meetings are held to discuss loyalty, report on each other, and study regime propaganda. Failure to report wrongdoing or being reported yourself can lead to interrogation, imprisonment, or execution. All phones are monitored, and only North Korea's internal network, KoreaLink, is allowed. It has no access to the global internet. Foreign SIM cards and USB devices are banned. Possession of South Korean media or foreign content can even lead to execution. In recent years, North Korea has deployed surveillance drones and expanded its cybersecurity apparatus to monitor digital activity. Even when some citizens sneak Chinese cell phones across the border to contact relatives or access outside information, they do so under extreme risk. From a young age, North Koreans are subjected to constant propaganda. Schools teach the superiority of the Kim family and the evil of outsiders. Workers are required to attend daily or weekly ideological sessions, and loudspeakers in homes and public places blare regime messages, often from morning until night. Dissent isn't just dangerous, it's unthinkable, because the regime's narrative is all-encompassing. Critical thinking is not taught, obedience is. The regime tracks every citizen's loyalty score, known as Songbun. It's based on your family history, political background, and perceived loyalty. It determines where you live, what jobs you can have, access to food and healthcare, and whether your children can attend university. People with low Songbun are assigned to dangerous jobs, denied promotions, or sent to rural areas or labour camps. One family's members' defection or crime can lower the entire family's status for generations. It's surveillance by social engineering, ensuring the most loyal stay empowered and the rest are oppressed. Any form of resistance, religious worship, criticism, possession of foreign media is treated as a political crime. These offences are often punished with imprisonment, torture, public execution, or exile to labour camps. Collective punishment is also common, where entire families are punished for the actions of one individual. Because of this, most people don't just comply, they enforce compliance among their peers. North Korea is now using facial recognition, biometric data, and advanced CCTV networks, especially in Pyongyang. The government tracks people's shopping habits, attendance at events, and movements using smart cards linked to personal data. Cybersecurity units such as Bureau 121 also engage in hacking, digital espionage, and monitoring of online behaviour both internally and abroad. The real power of North Korea's surveillance system is that even when no one is watching, people assume they are being watched, which breeds paranoia and self-censorship, broken trust between friends and even family members, and a society where silence and obedience are survival tools. What do we know about starvation and the denial of aid in North Korea? Starvation and the denial of humanitarian aid in North Korea are not just consequences of mismanagement, they are weapons of political control. The regime has long used food scarcity and access to aid as tools to maintain power, punish dissent, and reward loyalty. This strategy has led to one of the worst and most preventable humanitarian crises in modern history. North Korea has experienced chronic food shortages for decades due to a mix of failed economic policies, especially the centrally planned agricultural system, extreme weather such as floods, droughts, and harsh winters, international sanctions which limit imports of fertilizers, fuel, and food, and a deep reluctance by the regime to reform or modernize agriculture. The most devastating example was the famine of the 1990s, known as the Arduous March, which killed an estimate of 600,000 to 3 million people, which was nearly 10% of the population. Access to food in North Korea is not equal. It's distributed through a state-run public distribution system that prioritizes those with high songbon, which is the loyalty status I just described. It feeds the military, party elite, and Pyongyang residents first, and leaves rural areas, labourers, and those with bad political backgrounds malnourished or starving. When food is scarce, which is often, the regime cuts rations for the least loyal, rather than adjusting national policy or seeking full transparency with aid organisations. North Korea has received food aid from the UN World Food Programme, the Red Cross, South Korea, China, and even the US over the years. However, the regime blocks independent monitoring, often refusing to allow aid workers to verify distribution. Aid is frequently diverted to the military, elite, or black market. Humanitarian agencies are banned from visiting certain regions, especially political prison zones where starvation is most severe, and aid distribution is often used as a loyalty test. Those who demonstrate political obedience may be rewarded, while others are excluded. As a result, multiple countries and agencies have suspended or limited aid, fearing it was enabling the regime or worsening oppression. When North Korea sealed its borders during the COVID-19 pandemic, all foreign aid, trade, and outside humanitarian assistance essentially stopped. Food imports from China dropped dramatically, prices of staple goods skyrocketed in local markets, ordinary North Koreans already living on the edge faced severe hunger, and reports from defectors and satellite imagery indicated increased deaths and malnutrition, especially in the countryside. Despite this, the regime refused vaccines, blocked aid deliveries, and maintained an aggressive self-reliance narrative, placing ideology over survival. According to the UN, about 40% of the population is chronically undernourished. Stunting among children, which is having a low height for your age, is common, especially in rural provinces. Many families survive on grass, tree bark, insects, or food forage from mountains. And in prison camps, starvation is deliberate. Prisoners are fed only enough to keep them alive, and sometimes not even that. In North Korea's gulags and labour camps, food deprivation is a primary method of punishment and control. Prisoners are fed rotten cornmeal or diluted soup with grass and stones. Those who try to steal food are beaten or executed. Some survivors report cannibalism during the worst famine years in camps. This is not simply neglect, it's an intentional mechanism of breaking people. In reference to the food scarcity in North Korea, here are some of the testimonies from North Koreans who escaped. "We ate anything we could, grass, rats, tree bark. I saw people die with swollen stomachs in the street. Food was used to test our loyalty. If we missed a self-criticism session, we didn't eat the next day." These accounts are consistent across regions, time periods, and social classes, highlighting that starvation in North Korea is both engineered and enforced. Starvation keeps the population weak, distracted, and desperate. It erodes social cohesion as people steal, lie, and even turn in neighbours for food access. It generates dependency on the state, which holds the keys to survival. And worst of all, it normalizes suffering in the collective psyche, turning hunger into a political norm. What do we know about the persecution of defectors and their families in North Korea? The persecution of defectors and their families in North Korea is ruthless, systematic, and deeply embedded in the regime's philosophy of total control. The state considers defection not just a betrayal of the regime, but an act of treason against the supreme leader himself. As a result, defectors and anyone remotely connected to them face severe punishment. North Korea labels anyone who escapes the country a traitor, a class enemy, or even a spy for imperialists. Defection is considered an insult to the Kim family, an attack on national unity, and a crime of ideology, not just illegal movement. The regime's stance is that no true North Korean would want to leave unless they were ideologically corrupt, disloyal, or brainwashed by enemies. If a defector is caught and forcibly returned to North Korea, especially from China, they face horrifying treatment including torture during interrogation, often to extract names of contacts, Christian groups, or South Korean agents, imprisonment or execution, especially for repeat escapees or those suspected of religious activity. Pregnant women repatriated from China have reportedly been forcibly aborted, especially if the fetus is assumed to be impure, meaning half Chinese, and survivors report beating, starvation, and being treated worse than common criminals. China, despite international pressure, continues to classify North Korean defectors as economic migrants and routinely sends them back, violating international refugee protections. One of the most chilling aspects of North Korea's de facto policy is the use of collective punishment. Family members of defectors, even distant relatives, may be interrogated, demoted, relocated, or imprisoned. Those with suspected ties to defectors can be sent to Kwan-li-so, the political prison camp, for life. Children are often banned from higher education, denied jobs, or assigned to menial labour, and entire families are sometimes forcibly relocated to remote areas or labour colonies as punishment. This policy serves to deter potential defectors by making them fear not only for their lives but the state. The state also uses propaganda and public punishment to stigmatise defectors. People suspected of planning to flee may be forced to confess in public self-criticism sessions. In some towns, fake reunions are staged where returnees thank the great leader and denounce their time abroad, often under duress. Families of defectors are monitored by local informants, harassed, and made to perform loyalty tasks to prove their allegiance. Even talking about defection is taboo, and children are taught to report parents or teachers who speak of South Korea favourably. Even successful defectors who reach South Korea or the West live with perpetual guilt and fear. Many never contact their families again to avoid exposing them to retribution. Those who speak out against the regime publicly are often targeted for assassination or intimidation, even abroad. Some defectors in China are kidnapped by North Korean agents and brought back across the border. North Korea also spreads disinformation about defectors, calling them human scum or puppets of the South, attempting to discredit their testimony. A survivor testimony from North Korea stated, "When I crossed the river, I knew I could never go back, but I also knew that my mother would suffer because of my choice." Another testimony stated, "I saw people dragged away for talking to a defector's family. It wasn't just about escape, it was about fear, total fear." These voices echo a common reality. Defection is never just about one person, it's about everyone they leave behind. It's estimated that over 30,000 North Koreans have successfully defected to South Korea since the 1990s. It's believed that hundreds of thousands have tried and failed, or remain in hiding in China, Laos, Vietnam, or Thailand. China currently holds hundreds of North Korean defectors, many awaiting forced repatriation. Entire villages in North Korea have been cleansed after high-profile defections through surveillance, relocation, or imprisonment. The persecution of defectors is central to maintaining the illusion of national perfection. If people leave and thrive, the lie of North Korea's paradise collapses. That's why the regime suppresses defectors at all costs. Families are used as hostages of loyalty, and the entire system depends on isolation, fear, and collective punishment. What do we know about religious persecution in North Korea? Religious persecution in North Korea is severe, as the regime tightly controls and restricts religious practices. The government, under Kim Jong-un's rule, officially promotes atheism and views religious belief as a threat to the state's authority and ideology. The North Korean regime operates under a policy of total control, where any religious activity outside of the state-sanctioned organizations is seen as subversive. All forms of religious expression are strictly monitored, and individuals who engage in unauthorized religious practices are often subjected to harsh punishment. There are a few officially recognized religious organizations in North Korea, such as the Korean Christian Federation and the Korean Buddhist Federation, but these groups are tightly controlled by the government. They mainly serve as a way for the regime to maintain the appearance of religious tolerance for the international community. Practicing religion outside these official organizations is illegal. Individuals found practicing religion clandestinely can face severe consequences including imprisonment, torture, forced labor, and in some cases, execution. North Korean defectors have reported witnessing brutal repression of religious activities. Christian practitioners, for example, are targeted, and the regime is particularly hostile to Christianity, viewing it as a foreign influence that could undermine the state's control. Christians are one of the most persecuted religious groups. Many of them practice their faith in secret, often using underground house churches. The regime considers Christianity a significant threat due to its perceived allegiance to foreign powers, especially South Korea and the United States. Buddhism and shamanism also face restrictions. Even though there are state-sponsored Buddhist organizations, independent practice is not allowed. Muslims, Hindus, and other religious minorities are virtually non-existent in North Korea, largely because of the government's absolute control over religious activity. Reports from organizations like Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International indicate that North Korea is one of the most repressive countries regarding religious freedom. The US State Department has designated North Korea as a country of particular concern for religious freedom violations for many years. Many defectors who have fled the country report that the government actively tracks and punishes those who engage in religious activities. Some defectors have shared stories of being detained for possessing Bibles or having contact with foreign religious groups. Religious activities or possessing religious material can be seen as a form of political dissent, which is one of the most serious offences in North Korea. Kim Jong-un's regime has continued the policy of religious persecution established by his father, Kim Jong-il, and grandfather, Kim Il-sung. North Korea's ruling philosophy, known as self-reliance, promotes an almost religious reverence for the Kim family as godlike figures, and any competing belief system is seen as a challenge to the state. There have been some reports suggesting that the regime may have softened its stance slightly on religion in isolated cases, but overall, the government's position remains hostile towards all religious groups. Religious persecution in North Korea is part of a broader pattern of human rights violations, and it remains one of the most severe examples of religious intolerance in the world today. What do we know about North Korea's legal system? North Korea's legal system is highly centralized, repressive, and operates under the absolute authority of the ruling Kim family. The country's legal system is structured to uphold the regime's control and maintain the power of the Kim dynasty, rather than to ensure justice or the protection of individual rights. Rule of law is virtually non-existent in North Korea. Instead of a legal system that protects individual rights, the law serves as a tool for the regime to enforce its policies, control the population, and suppress dissent. The supreme leader, currently Kim Jong-un, holds absolute power and is not bound by any laws. The legal system operates according to the regime's will and policies rather than established legal norms. North Korea has a constitution, most recently amended in 2019, but it is largely symbolic and does not reflect an independent judiciary or meaningful checks on the government's power. While the constitution theoretically guarantees some civil liberties, such as freedom of speech and the right to work, these rights are routinely violated. The regime's interpretation of these rights is always subordinate to the political goals of the state. The criminal code is based on Marxist-Leninist principles and the ideology of self-reliance. It is often used to punish any perceived disloyalty to the regime. The Kim family and the ruling Workers' Party of Korea hold complete control of the legal and judicial system. The regime views law as a tool to maintain social control and punish enemies of the state, rather than a means to administer justice impartially. Kim Jong-un is not bound by the constitution or laws and has the ultimate authority to interpret the law and issue decrees. Political decisions are made according to the needs of the regime, not legal procedures. The judiciary in North Korea lacks independence. The courts are controlled by the party and serve to enforce government policy and suppress opposition. Judges and prosecutors are often party members who follow the directives of the ruling Kim family rather than any legal standard or principle of justice. The Supreme Court is the highest court in the country. but its decisions are typically made in alignment with the ruling regime's political goals. It is not an independent or impartial institution. The legal process in North Korea is arbitrary with no presumption of innocence. Trials, if they occur at all, are often for show and are heavily influenced by political considerations. The accused typically do not have access to independent legal counsel, and the verdict is often predetermined. Confessions are routinely coerced, sometimes through torture or threats to family members. Political prisoners often face harsh sentences, including forced labour, torture, or even execution. The legal system is used as a mechanism to eliminate perceived threats to the regime, including activists, defectors, religious practitioners, and those accused of espionage or disloyalty. North Korea has strict laws that criminalize a wide range of behaviors, including actions perceived as undermining the authority of the state. For instance, defamation of the leadership, disrespecting the Kim family, or attempting to flee the country are serious crimes. Punishments are severe, and the state employs a collective punishment system, which means that not only the accused, but also their family members, including children and grandparents, can be punished, and often through imprisonment in labour camps or execution. Labour camps, also called gulags, are infamous for their brutal conditions. Inmates are subjected to forced labour, extreme physical abuse, and inadequate food and medical care. Many people die in these camps due to the harsh conditions. Executions, often by firing squad, are used to punish individuals convicted of serious crimes or political disloyalty. High-profile purges have occurred, where high-ranking officials or even family members of the ruling Kim dynasty have been executed. North Korea is frequently criticised by international organisations such as the United Nations and Human Rights Watch for its systematic and widespread human rights violations, including the legal persecution of its citizens, arbitrary detentions, torture, forced labour and executions. The regime's refusal to adhere to international human rights standards and its non-compliance with treaties such as the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights further isolate it from the international community. While North Korea's legal system remains fundamentally authoritarian and oppressive, there have been occasional reports suggesting efforts to modernise certain aspects of the legal system, particularly in response to economic reforms or external pressure. However, these changes are largely superficial and do not alter the core repressive nature of the legal system. What do we know about propaganda and indoctrination in North Korea? Propaganda and indoctrination are central to North Korea's control over its population and are used as tools to maintain the regime's power, suppress dissent, and ensure total loyalty to the ruling Kim family. The regime employs a sophisticated, pervasive system of propaganda that reaches into almost every aspect of life, creating a carefully crafted narrative that glorifies the government and its leadership while demonizing external enemies. Media in North Korea is entirely controlled by the state. There are no independent news outlets, and all forms of media, including print, television, radio, and the internet, are tightly regulated and censored. Newspapers, television broadcasts, and radio stations are all state-run and serve the sole purpose of promoting the Kim family and the ideology of self-reliance. International news is heavily filtered. Only content that supports the government's narrative is allowed, and foreign media sources are either blocked or distorted to portray North Korea's enemies, such as the US and South Korea, in a negative light. Internet access is severely restricted and monitored. Ordinary citizens do not have access to the global internet, and instead they can only access a domestic intranet, which is heavily curated by the government. The regime has cultivated a cult of personality around the ruling Kim family, beginning with Kim Il-sung, continuing with Kim Jong-il, and now under Kim Jong-un. The Kim family is portrayed as near-divine figures, with Kim Il-sung being credited with the country's creation and considered the eternal president. Kim Jong-il is depicted as a genius and an infallible leader, while Kim Jong-un is promoted as the rightful heir and protector of the nation's prosperity and security. Statues, portraits, and images of the Kim family are displayed everywhere, including in homes, in schools, government buildings, and public spaces. Citizens are expected to show reverence to these images, and failing to do so can lead to punishment. Kim Jong-un's leadership is often exaggerated through propaganda, with reports claiming his extraordinary achievements, from his military strategy to his culinary skills. State media often glorifies him as a protector of the people and a leader of unparalleled wisdom. Children's education is heavily indoctrinated from an early age. The North Korean government shapes curricula to promote loyalty to the state and the Kim family. School children are taught to revere the Kim family and are made to memorize speeches and slogans that emphasize the importance of the leader in the state. History is rewritten to glorify the achievements of the Kim family and portray North Korea as a powerful, self-sufficient nation surrounded by enemies. Subjects like maths, science, and history are often used as vehicles for promoting the state's ideology. For example, maths problems might involve calculating how many enemies a country has, or the achievements of the Kim family, rather than standard educational content. The Chosun Children's Union and Kim Il-sung Socialist Youth League are youth organizations designed to instill loyalty to the regime. They participate in state-sanctioned activities such as parades, patriotic songs, and the celebration of national holidays like Kim Il-sung's birthday, known as the Day of the Sun. The regime organizes large-scale events known as the mass games, which are designed to demonstrate the power of the state and the loyalty of the people. These events often involve synchronized dancing, gymnastics, and performances that glorify the Kim family and the country's military might. Arirang is a famous mass performance that takes place every year and is a powerful demonstration of the regime's ability to mobilize large numbers of people for propaganda purposes. These events serve as both entertainment and indoctrination, reinforcing the idea that the state's power is absolute and that all citizens are united in support of the leader. The military plays a central role in the regime's propaganda. North Korea's military-first policy, known as Sogun, prioritizes the military and its needs above all other aspects of society. Military service is compulsory, and the state propagates the narrative that the North Korean military is the most powerful force in the world, constantly under threat from external enemies, especially the US and South Korea. This is used to justify the regime's militarization and the need for a strong, unified front. The state promotes military parades as demonstration of North Korea's strength and superiority, often showing off missiles, tanks, and other military assets as a form of intimidation and pride. The state employs a vast array of slogans to maintain loyalty and compliance. Popular slogans include "Long live Kim Jong-un" or "Let us uphold the party and the leader forever." These are repeated constantly in schools, workplaces, and public spaces. Symbols such as the flag, emblems, and the Kim family portraits are ubiquitous, reinforcing the regime's control and ideology. The people are encouraged to worship the leader and view him as a savior of the nation. The regime especially demonizes South Korea and the United States, portraying them as imperialist forces seeking to destroy North Korea. These countries are often depicted as evil or morally corrupt in North Korean media. Internationally, North Korea uses propaganda to promote its own version of events. For example, it regularly accuses the United States and South Korea of committing human rights abuses or preparing for war, even as the regime itself systematically oppresses its own people. Kim Jong-un's government also attempts to portray itself as a champion of peace and sovereignty, claiming that its nuclear program is a necessary defense against external threats, despite its widespread international condemnation. Kim Jong-un has continued and even amplified the propaganda machine established by his father and grandfather. Under his leadership, the emphasis on loyalty to the regime and the Kim family has remained central, and he has worked to further solidify his control through public displays of power and frequent visits to military and industrial sites. North Korean propaganda under Kim Jong-un has also become more modern, incorporating social media and technology to maintain control and engage with external audiences, especially as parts of efforts to portray a more acceptable image to the world. North Korea's propaganda and indoctrination system is highly effective and deeply entrenched in every facet of life, from education to media to public events. The regime uses it to maintain an iron grip on power, suppress opposition, and ensure that loyalty to the Kim family is unquestionable. The combination of fear, loyalty, and brainwashing makes North Korea one of the most controlled and isolated societies in the world. Its society is redolent of George Orwell's 1984 and Animal Farm. To think that a society like this exists in the 21st century just beggars belief for most of us, and also highlights the ingenuity of George Orwell's work on the catastrophe far-left communism can bring about. Since China borders North Korea and is considered an ally, more has been expected from China to mitigate the human rights abuses. However, due to its strategic interest in maintaining stability in the Korean peninsula and preserving its alliance with the North Korean regime, it has consistently been reluctant to support measures that would directly hold the regime accountable for its treatment of its people. China's actions, such as forcibly repatriating North Korean defectors, have contributed to the perpetuation of North Korea's human rights abuses, and it has remained resistant to significant international pressure on this front. While China officially condemns human rights violations, its actions have largely been inconsistent, often prioritizing its geopolitical and economic interests over human rights concerns.